Welcome to Dialogue. Joe Biden, President-elect of the United States, called the Capitol Hill protest one of the darkest days in U.S. history and blamed President Trump for inciting violence. Trump, on the other hand, struck a rational tone for the first time in a long time, condemning the rioters. But was that too little too late? What are the damages being done politically for Trump, his Republican Party, and U.S. institutions? Will Joe Biden be able to heal the divide, and how? To discuss all this, I'm joined by Professor John Gunn from the University of International Business and Economics, Brandon Andrews, an entrepreneur and former Capitol Hill staffer in Washington, D.C., and Professor Robert Kelly from Pusan National University. That is our topic. I'm Wang Guan. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us, in the early morning hours there in D.C. You were a Trump supporter. Do you still support Donald Trump now, given what's happened?
Yeah, so I did work for a Republican member of Congress, but I was not a Trump supporter. I think the Republican Party has a lot of soul searching to do, and if it doesn't make the correct decisions, it may be time for our country to move on from the party, at least move on from the Republican Party as we know it. We've seen what happened this week on Capitol Hill. I spent the better part of 5 years working in the United States Senate, both in the district office and also in the office in Washington, D.C. At that time, protests were fairly common, and I think a lot of people may be surprised at the amount of access that not just U.S. citizens, but tourists, etc., have to the Capitol Hill complex. Now, there's always Capitol Police, there's always security. However, protesters were always there. But what we saw this week was very different, and it was incited by the president, and it was certainly due to Republicans' inability to push back on the president when he over and over again spread lies and misinformation that fomented this mob to go into the Capitol building, deface property, destroying a tribute to Representative John Lewis and among other things. And so I think if this party can't get it right, then we need to move on from it because over and over again they've had opportunities to make the right decisions.
Talking about moving on from the Trump-centric GOP, do you think the GOP is already doing that? I mean, moving away from a Trump-centric party?
Well, we still had over 100 House members, Republican House members, and 6 U.S. senators vote against certification even after an angry mob swarmed into the Capitol, destroying, moving away barricades, leading to the death of a Capitol police officer. And so I still don't think the Republican Party has learned its lesson in this regard. And this is really more of the same over and over again. We've seen during the Trump administration, and even before it, a reluctance to push back. We've seen a recalcitrance when it comes to pushing back on leaders who are saying things that are homophobic, that are xenophobic, that are racist, that are sexist, things that wouldn't and shouldn't fly. Although there have been some high-level defections, cabinet-level defections from the Trump administration, the GOP is having their winter meeting, and folks like Nikki Haley are using stronger words. Where were these words months ago when Trump began spreading these lies, began moving forward these baseless claims in terms of election handling? And if the party doesn't make the right decisions here, I don't think there's a place for it in American politics, because not only is it a threat in terms of racism and sexism and ideological differences, many Americans don't feel like they can find a place in the Republican Party because of the choices that it's made over the years, because of the constant, not just claims of, but constant evidence of racism, sexism, etc. in the party. But it is a threat to democracy if these folks aren't pushing back on members of the party who want to attack our democracy as we know it.
Professor John Gunn in Beijing, I want to go to you. You lived in the U.S. for many, many years. You studied and watched U.S. politics closely. What went through your mind when you saw those visuals of people storming through the Capitol Hill?
I can't even believe it. I have never ever imagined that something like this could have ever
Me either.
happened. It goes down in history as a moment of I don't want to say this as a moment of sedition, insurrection, as Chuck Schumer has put it, and other Senate leaders have put it. I think this is more than just sabotage of properties and trespassing. I mean, this is a premeditated event. I think the idea of storming the Capitol Hill has been circulating on these extreme rights websites for some time. And it was directed by this president when he said, you have to walk to the Capitol Hill, you have to show strength, you have to be strong, supplemented by Rudy Giuliani when he said, maybe we should try by combat. All these words, what do they mean? I think it's this is a coup d'etat, to put it. I think this is something that we've never seen before. It's it's a moment that should have happened in America, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate. I was there for 8 years. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw those images. Robert, let me go to you. There was accusations of disparity in treatment of these largely white rioters versus the black demonstrators. Do you see such a double standard? I mean, what went through your mind when you saw those protests that turned violent?
Yeah, I think that's the second most important takeaway from all of this. The most important takeaway is that the United States has a far-right militia movement that is really not under any serious surveillance by law enforcement and is growing and getting more bold and more provocative. I would be surprised if something like this doesn't happen again. I think if you're a far-right extremist, the storming of Capitol Hill the other day was actually quite a victory for you. You got away with a lot. The police didn't respond very harshly. The president cheered you on. Major political figures like Senator Ted Cruz and former Mayor Rudy Giuliani of New York City talked sort of ambivalently at best, positively, at worst about you. I mean, I think if you're a far rightist in the United States, you had a really good day the other day, and I would imagine this stuff is going to come again in the future. So that's the big takeaway, that the United States has a militia movement that's become a genuine threat to domestic security. I think the second most important takeaway is the one that you brought up, which is that this really, in comparison to the police behavior of last summer, this really threw into stark contrast the differential police treatment of people in America by race or by color. I mean, I don't think anybody believes that if those protesters had been black or Muslim or anything like that, that they would not have experienced much harsher force in response. I mean, I was just shocked that these guys were like walking out of the Capitol building afterwards, high-fiving each other, and they weren't all being arrested. I just found that astonishing. But here we are, and I think that's probably the other big takeaway, right? I mean, like what's going on with American law enforcement that these guys are getting a pass?
Yeah. Brandon, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think to underscore what he said, the treatment during the summer, I live in Washington, D.C., and attended several of the Black Lives Matter protests that happened over the summer. And I think one thing that wasn't mentioned was the National Guard response and the fact that it took hours to respond. I remember there was a protest, a car train, because it was during the pandemic, of folks honking horns and driving around the city, and seemingly within minutes, there was a huge caravan of local National Guard troops who were coming down to the wharf area in Washington, D.C. to respond. And so there has to be something to that. If you can respond to a group of 30 to 50 Black Lives Matter protesters with at least 100 National Guard troops, a caravan of National Guard troops, why can't you respond to hundreds or thousands of Trump supporters who are storming the Capitol within enough time to be able to prevent the breach that happened in the Capitol, to prevent the issues that we saw? I think it just, again, going back to the Republican Party, underscores the inequity that the party has continued to proliferate around the country, and black, brown, female immigrant folks that are seen as other by a lot of folks that are conservative and Republican in this country, have struggled to find a home in the party, even if they agree with some of the ideologically have some agreement there. they struggle to find a home. And if the party doesn't correct this, again, I don't think there's a place for it in American politics.
Yeah, Professor Gong, let's talk about the political ramifications here. We saw the resignation of the Secretary of Education this morning in the U.S., late night in Beijing. This resignation of Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, along with some other high-profile officials. Also, reports said that Trump's business allies and donors are distancing themselves from him. What do you make of all this?
I think President Trump's political life is over. It's, big stain in his career. But I think the fact that these cabinet members have resigned, I think it's already too late. I mean, even though it's better late than never. But
it's a bit of a show, right?
I think it's a bit of a show. I think it's they've been talking about Secretary Mnuchin and Pompeo. Trying to talk to other cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment, but I'm a little bit skeptical that's going to happen within the short period of time left. So these people, some people still have political aspirations, and they're doing this to distance from him in order to preserve their own political life. But they have been with Trump for so long, for too long, I think, to totally sever ties with him, to totally distance from him. So I think American people are going to remember these people, remember this administration, which is a travesty as well as a tragedy. And afterwards, I think there's also the issue of accountability. I don't think the Senate and the House Democrat leadership would ever forgive him for doing this, and they will go after him. Ruthlessly, I would say, relentlessly, that they will hold this president accountable for what he has done to history as well.
Yeah. Talking about doing something to President Trump, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, urged Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment, as Professor Zhang said, saying that there's only, of course, 12 days left in Trump's tenure, but he should be removed from office. Robert, do you think that is doable?
I don't. I think the practicalities of it and the short time span militate against it. I think it'd be a good idea. I think a lot of people now accept that Donald Trump is grossly unfit for office. I don't think that's really much dispute anymore. But there's a lot of sort of just sheer practicalities of it, right? That are difficult. The most important being with the 25th Amendment solution, with that Mike Pence rebuffed those calls. At least that's what's being reported in the media. The alternative to that is a rushed impeachment process. You could probably get a conviction or an indictment out of the House of Representatives. It would then go to the Senate, and you'd have to find Republican votes again, and you'd have the same problem you did earlier.
Yeah, not going to have the supermajority. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty unlikely. My guess is that Trump will probably keep his mouth shut for the next couple days, at least through inauguration. And I think the next big thing will be how will he behave on Inauguration Day, and specifically, will these guys show up again? Will the militia guys come back and try to disrupt the inauguration? I would say that that's the next big deal. I would imagine Trump will keep his head down for the next couple weeks.
Okay, then what do you think will happen to Trump and his family fortune and family business? Given the debt that he still owes and the the reputational costs, let's put it that way, after what's happening on the Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I do think that once he actually loses the immunity of executive privilege, that he will in fact wind up in court cases all over the place. I think he's going to be tied up in all kinds of arbitration for years to come, most particularly back in New York State, in New York City. I think that's pretty well established at this point. As politically, though, I actually disagree. Maybe I'm an outlier on this, but I actually disagree with people who are saying that sort of this is really going to hurt him, his career is over and stuff like that. I mean, Trump has endured all kinds of hits in the past and come back again and again and again. I mean, his approval ratings inside the Republican Party are basically bulletproof. His approval ratings, his favorability ratings inside the Republican Party, and his general approval rating in the country will probably slip when the polling gets done in the next couple of days. But it only really matters if it stays down, right? I mean, it'll slip, but if it bounces back in 2 or 3 months and Republicans are saying he's still great and he's still got 60 or 70, 80, 90% approval rating inside the Republican Party in the next few months, which I imagine will happen, I don't actually think that this sort of pushes him out of national politics. Maybe
I want to give a chance for Professor Gong to respond on.
Well, I think even though his popularity within the Republican Party is still appears not to be too much damaged, but the Republican leadership understands that if he runs again, he's not going to win. I think even in this under such a competitive environment right now, he lost by say 5 million votes, right? So again, in 2024, with this event behind him, I don't think there got to be many decent Republicans who are heartbroken, who are not going to vote for this guy. So even though I think his popularity is still high within the Republican Party, no matter how you look at it, he's not going to have the vote to get a national mandate anymore. And if that's the case, why would he ever get any support within the Republican Party GOP leadership? There will be other contenders. I mean, we have a list of at least 8 people who are vying for the next vote. So I don't think he's in a chance at all.
Yeah, we'll have to agree to disagree there. Brandon, what do you think? Do you think this is the end of Trump's political career?
No, I don't think it's the end of Trump's political career, unfortunately. I think he does have solid support. I think there are folks in on the right side of the political spectrum that are clamoring leadership that looks like the kind of leadership or lack thereof that he provides. When it comes to his business career, I think he has consistent support from parts of this country. The question is, are those people, are those consumers the kind of people that can, buy a night at Trump resorts and that can support his businesses? If those are not, then his businesses, I think, are certainly going to take a hit. But politically, whether it's him running a political action committee and trying to be a kingmaker in terms of conservative politics moving forward, or whether it's him running for office again, we haven't seen the last of him. However, I do certainly hope that there's enough wherewithal within the party, whether it's folks running against him or folks just tired of the brand of non-leadership that he brings, to push back against him and to keep him from gaining prominence again.
Professor Gong, what about Trumpism? I mean, let's say we disagree on whether or not Trump's political future is done. What are the damages being done to Trumpism and his most fervent supporters?
I think this ideology is still there. There's still, as the previous speaker said, there's still going to be wide support behind this kind of ideology. But the thing is that the United States political landscape and also demographic landscape is changing, and this kind of ideology, particularly even within the GOP itself, is losing steam in my view. Moving forward, I don't think the base of GOP is shrinking. I mean, look at the demographics, and I would even surmise that in this year, Georgia flipped blue. I think next one is very likely in 4 years going to be Texas, even maybe North Carolina, Florida also have a chance. As these southern states see more and more professionals moving into these big cities like Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth area, the Democratic base is expanding, let alone there could be more immigrants, Latino population. So I think in these southern states, the GOP's traditional what's called southern strategy is not going to work anymore. They're on the losing side of time, in my view.
Yeah. We saw heated battles, if you will, in the capital city, in one of the biggest cities in Texas, Houston, over there, big, minority population over there. I want to show you some of our viewers' comments. They're really interesting. In fact, if I can, one of our viewers said these points that I thought was really interesting. Muhammad Safa, actually, he's not just any viewer. I think he was a former diplomat, said, if the United States saw what the United States is doing in the United States would invade the United States to liberate the United States from the tyranny of the United States. A tongue twister indeed. Robert, your reaction. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. 1 second. We'll have another comment from another viewer saying this before I go to Robert, if I may. This year, due to COVID-related travel restrictions, the U.S. had to organize a coup at home. Pretty harsh. Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, democracy export's going to be difficult for the United States to argue in the wake of this. I think the United States population is kind of burned out on that anyway, right? I mean, one of the big foreign responses in the last 48 hours has been the Americans lost the moral high ground to lecture the planet about democracy and regime change and things like that, right? So I think there will be a foreign policy hit to this. Certainly, I would imagine that a lot of America's opponents out there are sort of happy to see this happen, right? I mean, this is sort of chaos in the heart, which nobody really expected. I mean, particularly if you're the Russians, I think this is sort of what you were looking for, right? I mean, this is why Putin supported, Trump's candidacy back in the day. The real question is whether or not I think this sticks, right? I mean, will there be a post-Republican Party, a post-Trump Republican Party that can sort of revert back to normalcy so that you get something like a stable two-party system? Or is the Republican Party after Trump going to continue to go down this route and become this kind of like guerrilla, this sort of like guerrilla party that sort of treats the U.S. government as sort of like an internal opponent? If that continues, if Josh Hawley picks up the flag, if Ted Cruz picks up the flag, and you continue to have this kind of like aggressive militant attitude towards the central government inside one of America's major political parties, then the United States will be interrupted by these kinds of crises every time the Republican Party picks the presidency.
Well, Brendan, how do you look at those criticism as an American? Those attacks on criticisms of America's democracy.
I think the criticism should certainly be expected. I also think the reality is, yes, there was a breach at the Capitol. However, there will still be a peaceful transition of power. All of the democratic norms are still in place. No one wants what happened this week to happen again. No one wanted it to happen. However, this is markedly different than what has happened in a lot of other countries. And although the U.S. has lost some of that moral high ground, there's still a standard to uphold. And I think we'll see that happen when the transition of power happens on January 20th. Now, on the GOP, I think the GOP has a choice in terms of how it's competitive moving forward. It can go down this road of solely relying on the Electoral College and diving deep into Trumpism and diving deep into some of these places that are quite frankly unsavory and that'll have, I think, negative ramifications for the party and the country. Or the GOP can look at the platform, expand, diversify, reach out to other audiences that haven't always felt at home in the party, but that may agree somewhat ideologically to be able to be competitive nationally. Because if they continue down the road of kind of wavering between the two, I don't think the GOP will be able to be competitive, and certainly it would be difficult, if not impossible, moving forward for the GOP to win a national election without the Electoral College.
True. Professor Gahn, I mean, Brendan just said that the democratic norms are still largely in place. Do you look at that way too, after 4 years of Trump?
That I have to agree. I think the U.S. democratic system still has a lot of resiliency, as demonstrated by the aftermath of the storming of the Capitol. I think all the major institutions are still there. Not just a few good people, a lot of good people, I think it's going to be a setback. The U.S. foreign policy is losing a lot of high moral ground, I guess. But I think there's also going to be soul searching within the State Department. I mean, I can't help comparing this with what happened in Hong Kong, right? When this happened in Hong Kong, almost exactly the same thing, other than there's actually no shots being fired in Hong Kong. I mean, look at how we were treated by politicians in the United States. Mark Rubio, I remember, came out saying that he doesn't see any violence, right? And that very famous statement from Nancy Pelosi saying that this is a very nice landscape, stuff like that. So I think this has got to be a lot of soul searching. Every country has a problem. Every country has its dark side, and I think that it's actually a very good thing that at least from Beijing's perspective, we didn't take a sort of attitude that's wishing it's happening like this. I think we're responding very in a very restrained way, and I think this is something that should be replicated by the State Department in the United States.
Let's look forward, guys. Joe Biden, what can he do to, as he promised, bridge the divide and heal the country? What does Joe Biden have in his toolbox now that he has the majority in both chambers of the Congress as well as the White House? What do you think, Robert?
I would say two things. The first is Biden should look for areas, legislative areas, where Republicans might actually sign up. I think one thing that the Trump administration could have done with Democratic support, for example, would have been infrastructure, and the Trump people simply dropped the ball probably because of incompetence. I think there's something there that the Biden people could do and pull at least some Republicans out of the Republican caucus in the Senate, particularly to get some kind of bipartisanship, right? I mean, that's ultimately what Biden wants and would signal healing to the country. If that doesn't work, I think then what Biden should start to do, I mean, if Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader for the Republicans, can hold the Republicans sort of together as a coherent bloc and block any kind of bipartisan deals, then I think what Biden ought to do is start to look around inside the Republican caucus and try to find individual people like Mitt Romney who have signaled a lot of dissatisfaction with the Trump approach, and try to sort of cut deals with them on small things as they go. But if the Republican Party simply holds the line like they did during the Obama period, right? If the Republicans in the Senate simply will not operate with Biden in any meaningful way, then there's really not much Biden can do for healing, right? And at that point, might get the progressive wing in the Democratic Party that says, look, the Republicans won't do anything with us at all. Let's just go full steam ahead because we tried and they're not going to listen to us.
Brendan, what do you think? What will happen next?
Yeah, I think Biden has the opportunity to continue the momentum that he built as the president-elect this week. If you listen to President-elect Biden's comments, he sounded very presidential. And in fact, there were reports from Congress. Of course, members of Congress were sequestered after the breach happened, Democrats and Republicans together, that everyone paused the conversation about policy and about certification, listened in and actually cheered and clapped to hear a president sound presidential and show leadership in a moment of crisis for the nation. So I think President-elect Biden can take that momentum forward through Election Day. One other area where I think there should be bipartisan agreement is on supporting America's small businesses. Small businesses, when you look at economic dynamism and their impact on the broader economy, are incredibly important. There's been a lot of focus on saving, quote unquote, small businesses, Main Street businesses through PPP, through grants and loans, through some of these stimulus programs. However, I think a shift of focus to helping people start new businesses across the country. This new world, including the pandemic and other things, presents a lot of new problems. We need solutions, and those innovative ideas are out there. People just need the resources to be able to do it.
Professor Gong, what do you think?
I think Biden has a tough job. I think he is confronted with a set of challenges. This has been political one, and then there's the pandemic. I think pandemic is going to be very big on his agenda. I think he's going to have a lot of difficulties if he isn't going to be able to contain it within the first half of the year. And then there's the economic difficulties. Currently, millions and millions of Americans are having problems, even meeting rents, paying rents. They're facing eviction. They need a lot of help from the federal government. So all these things are on his plate, and I think he's going to have to juggle things around and be try to be pushing and answer to these challenges. It's going to be a very, very tough job. But if he does do a good job, I think Democrats are going to stay there for another 4 years.
We'll see what happens post January the 20th. Thanks so much, Professor John Gunn. Always great to see you and have you here. Brandon Andrews, thank you. And Professor Robert Kelly. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you all so very much for watching. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.